Hey friends, welcome to the Empowered Homes Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to grow strong families by connecting church and home. I'm in studio with Megan. How are you, Megan?
Hey friends, doing well. Glad to be here.
Megan, we got a special guest on Zoom today. Who do we have with us?
We have Justin and Trisha Davis, and we are so excited to talk with them about their ministry and their new book. Welcome to the podcast, Justin and Trisha.
Hey, thanks so much for having us.
We're excited.
Yeah, we're so excited. And so I would love, just to kind of start off by, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourselves and your family, and then we'll roll into your ministry and your book.
Justin and I have been married for almost 30 years, which, you would think is like, oh, that's amazing. But it just makes us go, gosh, we're so old. What is happening right now?
We used to tell people we got married when we were 12, but now we look like we've been married for 30 years.
It's
so
true.
We can't get away with that anymore.
We have 5 kids, 3 that are grown out of the house, and 2 one's about to graduate high school and then middle school. We have 3 biological boys. They are out of the house. And then we adopted our son and daughter when they were 7 and 9. Gosh, now
almost 8
years ago.
Wow.
So yeah, our house is just wild.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're almost done, and then we're like, no, let's just start all over.
Nice.
It's good though. It's kind of like a redo, right? Like whatever, we struggled with in parenting first time around, we're going to get it on the back end, right?
Yeah, well, and our biological kids are all boys, and then the oldest of our adopted kids is a boy, but the youngest is a girl.
Oh.
And so it's been a completely different experience for those of you that have daughters. They're not like boys. And I learned that 8 years ago and continue to learn it every single day.
So is she like typical baby of the family wrapped around everybody's finger?
Yes, specifically her daddy. So yeah, it's funny. Our oldest, Micah, he is a church planner here in Indianapolis, and kind of your stereotypical oldest kid, rule follower. And he's like, that girl gets away with everything. I'm like, well, she's the baby of 5. Like
Right.
by this one, if I remember her name, we are winning. So it's all good.
She's the baby and she's a girl. So
Yeah.
she has both of those things going in her favor.
Yeah.
She's fantastic though.
Oh.
They all are.
Well, I love that.
That's awesome.
Yes. Well, we'd love to begin with just the incredible ministry work that you're doing at RefineUs Ministries. And, we know that was born out of your own personal story of failure and loss and ultimately redemption and transformation. And so how did God take you from complete marital brokenness to leading a thriving community of healing and transformation? If you could just talk a little bit about that story and what you're up to now.
Yeah, it's nothing that you would ever expect. Like if you said to us, 15 years ago, hey, this is what you're going to be doing 15 years from now. I don't think either of us would have believed that. But as you mentioned, it really is an overflow of our story. We were in ministry. We met in Bible college in 1993, and some of your listeners may not even have been born then. And so we met in Bible college, had this vision that we were going to change the world through the local church, and so we dove headfirst into student ministry. I did that for 7 years, and then felt like God had laid on our hearts this vision to plant a church where people didn't go to church. And so it's 2002. We have no idea what we're doing, but we started a church with $5,000 and 12 people, and God just blessed that effort of faith, that expression of faith, and the church began to grow. And I think early in ministry, I equated, developing my gifts with coinciding with developing my character. And what I began to realize is my gifts far exceeded my character. And we were 3 years into our church plant in 2005. The church had gone from 12 people to about 700 people in that 3 years. And people were finding Christ and finding a home and community and being baptized. It was just this amazing miracle. While at the same time, now Trish and I are 10 years into marriage, and we have 3 kids at that time, and all the pressures of ministry and really not feeling or knowing that we could express that we were struggling. And what we realized, 10 years into marriage and 3 years into this church plan, is that we had become really good ministry partners and really toxic marriage partners. Mm-hmm. And all of that culminated on October 9th, 2005, when I came home and confessed to Trish that I was having an affair with her best friend. And it wasn't a confession of remorse or repentance, but of resignation. Mm. And that really just started, obviously a downward spiral, an understatement. But we were separated for 2.5 months. We didn't talk for the next 10 days. And it was through that process of separation that God began to break my heart for my marriage again. And we started going to counseling together and went to counseling 4 days a week for 2 months. And so we tell couples that we work with now, if you feel like your marriage is struggling, our counselor will see us 4 days a week. That's how jacked up we were. Okay. So hang in there. You're going to be okay.
Yeah.
But God began to use those counseling sessions to peel back layers of brokenness and dysfunction that we hadn't taken the time or had the courage to talk about, and, began a restoration process that continues to this day. But it wasn't our vision to, let's go start a marriage ministry now that our marriage is healed. I got out of ministry and went into this, the business world and started working in sales, and never thought I was going to, go back into ministry again. And then 4 years after the affair, a local pastor asked if we would share our testimony.
Yeah. And so I know this is the part where everybody's going to be like, and then I'm going to say, I did, and God was so good. And I was like, nope, I'm not sharing our story. And
Right.
We never talked about it publicly up to that point.
no, and it was a local pastor.
Wow.
And I was like, dude, we've been in ministry. Don't pull the pastor card on me and say, will you pray about it? I was obviously a little tender at the time. And so I told him no. And a couple months later, I just spent time with God and just felt like he was kind of prompting. And so I told God, and I told the pastor, and I told Justin that I would share our story one time, and then I'm out. So here's your moment, God, and we shared our story. It was so bad, you guys. Like, we cried through the whole thing. I don't even know if we made sense. But then after the second service, people stayed for hours. It was crazy. And
they had somebody come and get our kids, because it's like 4 p.m. We're still talking and praying with people. It was just this holy moment.
And I kept looking at Justin saying, did they hear the wrong story? Because we're the poster children of how not to be married. Yeah. And then it just hit us. Like, God had given us this gift of a restoration story. And what they were asking were questions of how. And that really birthed our ministry, RefineUs Ministries, of asking those questions. Like, how do you come from the brink of death? How do you restore not just marriage relationships, just relationships in general that have been decimated? And that's kind of been our life journey since 2009.
Wow. Well, I do want to get into your book here, but for my listeners, they're kind of hanging on that next statement. If you could sum it up in, a few sentences, which I know is impossible, but share with us how. Like, how did the redemption start and that ball start rolling for God to do an amazing miracle in y'all's marriage? How?
Well, I think all of us who are married, we have this vision of what our marriage should be. And most of the time, there's a gap between what we think it should be and what it actually is. And in our first book, Beyond Ordinary, we talk about that gap is really what we call an ordinary marriage. And it's filled with unintentionality, right? We have great intentions, but we're not necessarily intentional in our choices to invest in our relationship, to be honest, to be fully known, to understand physical intimacy. Like, there's a gap between what we want and the choices that we are making. And so for us, what we began to realize is the affair got all the attention. It's the bomb that we drop when we go speak at churches. But it was a symptom of much deeper issues, not just in our marriage, but in our hearts and we brought all of this baggage into our marital relationship. But we were 19 and 20 years old. We had no idea that we even had it, much less how to find healing from it. And so that's really the journey that we hope to take people on, is the things that you feel like you're struggling with. It doesn't negate those struggles, but there's probably something under the surface that's causing you to feel that way. And so our hope is, by going first, we want to help other people go second.
Man. Yeah, your vulnerability to share what the bomb. I want to hear more. I want to hear all these things. And so I know you talk about a lot of different stuff in your new book, One Choice Away from Change. Was there a particular moment in your journey that kind of solidified the message of this book?
It's really almost like a continuation of the life lessons we've learned from our marriage implosion. And our marriage implosion opened up the gate to understand childhood wounds that had nothing to do with our marriage, and messages that were spoken over us and into us that turned into an unhealthy understanding of what it means to be in relationships. And that was carried over in our message or in our marriage. But I think our response to this question is probably a little bit different for each of us. But here now, gosh, almost 20 years later from our marriage falling apart, and now having 20 years of restored relationship, it's given us the ability to be able to be introspective of other relationships, and realizing so many of us, being in pastoral ministry for 30 years, we've sat across from students and from singles, young marrieds and divorced and married again. And we all struggle with the same thing of feeling like nothing is ever going to change. I'm going to be stuck in this unhealthy relationship. And when we feel like nothing will change, we feel helpless. And we feel helpless, we feel hopeless. And hopelessness is not the place that God calls us to live. And so we began asking this question. Really, over the past couple of years, we've had a wild ride. The book is deeply personal, of living out not just breaking cycles that we experienced in our marriage, but for us individually. So really, for me, the aha moment of writing this book was kind of like the same. There's a pattern with me, you guys, where God's like, you share your story. And I'm like, no. With this book, like, is this something I want to write? No. But I think because of the work that I was doing. And so I ended up going to what I call trauma camp. It is a place called Onsite in Nashville, Tennessee, that is just a place with licensed counselors. And I spent a couple of days with the licensed counselor, and we were just doing some deep work. And she said, what is one choice that you can make to change this? And I was like, girl, ain't that easy. Like, it doesn't, you need more, you need a plan. She goes, no, you can actually just start. What's one choice you could make? And it wasn't like an epiphany that now we want to write this book. It began a journey in me of going, okay, man, I can break this cycle by just making one choice today, and how it benefits the next choice I will make tomorrow.
Trisha's is way better. Her reasoning is way better than mine, but we do marriage coaching with couples, and it's a part of our ministry. And when we were kind of outlining this book, writing a book or doing anything creative is like, having a baby that you hold up to people and say, do you think my baby is cute? Right. And so it's a little intimidating. And so I'm a very visual person. So we have an office, and I had all these Post-it notes up on the wall, and we were kind of outlining the content of this book and how it could go and different things that we were thinking about writing. And we had a couple come in and sit down in our office for their coaching session. They were a local couple here. And the husband said, what is that? I said, well, that's kind of the guts of our new book. And he's like, well, we struggle with that. We struggle with that. We struggle with that. And it was like, okay, so this isn't just us, right? And so it was super helpful in real time to get that affirmation that we were on the right track of helping people not necessarily fix their entire life tomorrow, but make one choice today that moves you closer to God and closer to the person that He created you to be in whatever relationship is struggling.
That's so good. I think, when we think of looking back at our past and even sitting in brokenness, and just the freedom of understanding that, yes, there may be a lot of things that need to happen in order to come to a place of restoration, but to just look at that one choice and the freedom of going, okay, I can just do this one thing, or I can allow God to, work through this one thing. Gosh, there's such, I hope for people to understand, like there's such freedom in that. And, I love the tagline of your book. So the title is One Choice Away from Change. And the tagline is break the cycles that hurt your relationships and hold you back. And so, when we're talking about looking back into our past and the things that affect our relationships now, I think, as you outlined, there's significant barriers that people often struggle with when they get to that place. And so if you could just share a little bit about some of those barriers and how they can look at that differently.
Yeah, I think for my story, our marriage story was the beginnings of me understanding that I had a forgiveness issue long before the affair. And when I began to look back at my own story of being raised in a 2-parent house, kind of like, rose-colored glasses of my parents being great, and they were awesome parents. But when they divorced after 25 years, I was a year into my own marriage. And unknowingly, I began to operate out of kind of like a stiff arm that I love Justin, but I'm not really sure I can fully trust him. And I never thought that. It was just how I was responding in different things that made me nervous that maybe we're not, we went to Bible college. So like we were going to be okay. And then we came out with the idea that if you just love God and love people, we're going to have an up and to the right life. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times that happened in ministry, but it wasn't happening in my marriage. And so, for many of us, forgiveness, it's like when we don't know how to forgive, we convince ourselves we can just be a little bitter. Like I'm not really bad. I'm just a little bitter. But I didn't realize that bitterness over time leads to resentment. And resentment sticks you in a cycle that it's like you're doing the same things over and over again in your relationships, and you're expecting different results. And when those different results don't happen, the insanity of being in that relationship, you just quit trying. And when we quit trying, then we cut off the ability to be fully known and fully loved. And that's what God created us for, to be fully known and fully loved.
Justin, what about you? What are some barriers that you have seen when trying to get past our past, if you will?
Yeah, I think for a lot of like church going, song singing, God loving Christians, we think if I do religious activity, it's going to bring life transformation. So if I go to church more, if I read my Bible more, if I pray more, if I join a group, if I serve in the nursery, because that's extra credit in heaven, if we do all of these things, then it's going to bring us life and life to its fullest. And when it doesn't, then we think either something's wrong with me or something's wrong with my faith. And so there becomes this sense of resignation. And what we began to realize in our own story, and as we have worked with a lot of people, is if you don't heal the wounds from your past, they don't stay in your past. They affect your present. And anything that's affecting your present is also going to dictate the level of intimacy you can experience with God in the future. And so part of what we try to take the reader on in this new book is having the courage to face some of the wounds of your past and not being a victim. You are a victim of those wounds, right? If your dad left when you were 7, that you were a victim, that happened, right? If you were sexually abused in high school or assaulted in college or whatever, those are wounds that we accumulate, but you don't have to live in victimization. And helping the reader understand, like going back to the past, not to live there, but to allow Christ to heal it, is the first step of change.
Yeah, that's huge. And we say it all the time, when we're talking about wounds and pasts and all that, one of the phrases is like, we're not blaming the person who did the offense to us. We're not trying to point fingers. We're trying to put meaning to our story and put meaning to God's story and how he wants to bring about the healing and redemption for us. And so when, I work with a lot of parents and, they're parenting in a way that they don't love that they parent that way. And it's usually they're parenting out of a old wound. And so helping them see, maybe something that they got from their parents, not to blame their parents, like I'm the way I am because of you. No, Don't blame them. Put meaning to your story so you can break the cycle. So I know you talk about that in your book of breaking the cycle. Like, what's the big, I don't know, aha that folks can get? Maybe give us a teaser for hitting some true healing and really having that moment of redemption. Maybe just a teaser. You don't have to give us the whole thing, but
yeah. I think the bottom line that we want people to know is you're not as stuck as you think you are. Like, God is so committed to you breaking cycles he promises to make you brand new. Like, not an improved version of yourself, not, 2.0. He promises to recreate you every single day. Those that are in Christ are a new creation. That's how committed God is to it. And so if God is that committed to transforming our hearts and transforming us into the likeness of his son, we aren't as stuck as we think. And so being willing to admit that we don't have it all together, being willing to acknowledge that we do have wounds, and being willing to have the courage to stop blaming others and take ownership, God then steps in and says, okay, that's your part. Now watch me do my part.
Wow. That's huge. Exactly. That's what we want. And thank y'all for being that example and sharing all this through your book. Meg, you got one more question?
Yeah. Well, and just thinking through as I'm looking at the chapters when you get into the part 2 about, those different cycles, and the cycle of blame, cycle of unforgiveness, cycle of fear, cycle of hiddenness, and cycle of shame. And you go through, how to break those. And I think I'm curious in terms of like ending in the cycle of shame, and even just, sort of the courage of having to step out and relive and talk through your story, and not allowing that shame to keep you from allowing God to work through that. If you could just talk a little bit about that cycle of shame and how you've overcome that.
Yeah, I think shame is like a silent assassin of spiritual growth that we don't necessarily even recognize at times, because who is the hardest on us? We're hardest on ourselves, right? Like, this, if you're a parent, you're the hardest of your parenting on you, right? And if you're a spouse, the stories we tell ourselves are the most powerful, and we talk to ourselves more than anybody else. And so recognizing that we struggle with shame, that we have shame, sometimes it's shame for what's been done to us. Sometimes it's shame for choices that we've made. But Christ didn't die for us to experience shame. Conviction and shame are two different things. Conviction says, what I'm doing is wrong. I need to make another choice. Shame says, you are wrong and you are a bad person for what you've done. And so redefining our identity in Christ, or rediscovering our identity in Christ, is one of the big steps that I talk about in that chapter on shame. Because I think for many people, they know they struggle with it, and then they operate in their most closest relationships out of a disposition of shame. And so we respond to those we love most out of the insecurity and fears and shame that we're feeling the most. And so if we can help couples, or help couples, if we can help people rediscover their identity in Christ, then how we respond in relationships is from a place of health and not from a place of, dysfunction or brokenness. And I think that's, when we were outlining the book, we could have talked about the behaviors that people struggle with: conflict resolution, losing your temper. Like, there's a list of things that we do out of our own brokenness. But Trish and I really wanted to identify 5 things that are at the soul level, that if Christ can transform those things at the soul level, then our behavior is going to naturally, follow suit.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, thank you so much for your book, and just for allowing God to work through your story. And this is very tender for me, because this was my childhood of my own parents' journey. And so this is beautiful, and it's like I love it, and the work that God has done through my life. And I call it a junkyard, my junkyard, and the beauty that has come in through redemption, as their child, and how He's grown, in me. And so thank you for what you're doing, because this is something that I wish that I could have gotten in the hands of my parents. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So appreciate everything that you're doing.
Yeah, thank y'all so much for your time today. Before we go, our listeners, how can they get a hold of your book and then learn more about your ministry?
You can go to RefineUs.org or Justin and Trisha, I think it's .org. I'm truly dyslexic, so Justin's laughing that he's looking at me. He's like,
JustinandTrisha.com.
Did I say it backwards?
You said it .org. Don't go there.
.org.com.
JustinandTrisha.com.
We'll link
Yes.
it. We'll link it .com.
There you go.
Yes.
It was sweet of you to look at me and say, "You've got this, babe." And I was like, okay, I'll go for it. And it didn't work out, but this is what, it's part of it, people. It's real life.
30 years of marriage there. You can't see the side eye I gave her if you're just listening in your car. But you can also buy our book anywhere
Books are sold. There you go.
Yes.
You
Got that one.
Yeah, we'll link all of that onto the podcast notes. We will have the rightlinks.com on everything. Thank y'all so much for your time today. Those of you listening, if you are looking and you're like, man, I want some more resources on marriage, we've got a ton of great stuff on empoweredhomes.org. Go just search marriage. You could click the marriage tab on the homepage of the website. We've got a ton of great stuff. And we're looking forward to spreading the word about you guys and really sharing this book with our people. It's going to bless a lot of folks. It already is. So thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for having us.